welcome to another edition of Flock Tales with the Kansas Flamingo Chef. I'm glad you're here. Today I want to talk to you about something that was asked of me recently by an email, and that was, what is the difference between bourbon and whiskey? Well, as you might notice, I've got a few whiskeys. In fact, a lot. There's more below and more underneath, and there's some up here and some on the counter. But the difference between bourbon and whiskey is really simple. All bourbon is whiskey, but not all whiskey is bourbon. Are you more confused than you were when we began? Well, it's real simple. This is a bourbon. This is a bourbon. These are bourbons. This is a whiskey. Why? Now, when I say it's a whiskey, it's an American whiskey. You also have Scotch whiskey and Irish whiskey, Canadian whiskey. Those are not bourbon either. Japanese whiskey. But bourbon is a class of whiskey. What it is, it's American whiskey that follows some very specific rules. Number one, it has to be at least 51% corn. Two, it has to be aged in a new wood container for a minimum of 2 years. Three, it has to be made in the contiguous United States. Those are the basic rules. There's a couple others in there, but those are the big ones. So this is not bourbon. The reason it's not bourbon, this is Bullet 95. That's 95% rye. So since it's not at least 51% corn, it doesn't qualify as bourbon. Doesn't mean it's not good whiskey. It's just not bourbon. Bourbons are much different. They have a very distinctive flavor. Now that said, a lot of bourbons use rye as their secondary fermentable, but not all do. For example, this is a wheated bourbon. So is this big one back here. So is Maker's Mark. So is Weller. Those are bourbons that don't have rye. They're 51% corn, and then the other primary ingredient is rye, like the rye whiskey. But you also have pure rye whiskeys, like a Sazerac. So yeah, there are elements that are involved. But when you're asking what is bourbon, it just has to follow the rules. At least 51% corn, made in the 48 contiguous states, aged in a new charred wood container. It doesn't have to be a barrel, but let's be honest, everybody uses barrels just because they make more sense. And it has to be at least 2 years old. Now, they're better the older they get. For example, this is 13-year-old bourbon. Has a very different flavor than something that's like, 4-year-old benchmark. If you have questions, all you got to do is send them to me. Up soon, I'm going to make some bourbon cocktails. So I'll show you how to do that. Even though that's not my thing, I prefer rye whiskey cocktails. Bourbon, as far as I'm concerned, should be enjoyed neat. Have a great day, and make sure you remember to check out the other channel, the Kansas Flamingo Chef cooking channel, and of course, KansasFlamingoChef.com.